Okay, welcome. All right. And just having that sustained practice, and not really knowing where you're going to grow, but you will. You will grow, right? Just like what you said, you will continue. You will continue to grow. And like what Rick Rubin said, cultivate the awareness. What I say, awaken awareness or expand awareness, whatever that might be, or even just a subtle shift in the inquiry of who I am, or the understanding of who I may be. What is this thing that I call I? Right? And even that, a shift, a tiny little shift in that might might be very powerful. Integrating the spiritual practice with the science and having that link is really important. So, that's why we bring up the original research, right? And look at it together and read the abstracts and get a sense. And you can get a sense of kind of the language, like the almost like the BS language that is used. Like, so this study shows that this is, but and other studies need to be done, blah blah blah. But right, you're getting the results. You're getting the results in, and you're taking a look at them, and then you're able to, from the results themselves, you're actually able to make decisions. Do I want to do this 2 minute practice, or do I not want to do this 2 minute? Right? What were the differences in these little changes that they made, and are that enough for me to shift my practice? Right? Mostly, what we're trying to figure out is from the science is essentially how little do I have to do it, and what's the benefit that I get. So it's like, all right, 30 seconds, right? And amazingly, people have asked those questions, right? People have asked those questions. They're like, well, because they want to know, right? Everyone thought, well, you do a practice for 10,000 hours, right? There was always these sort of like beliefs, like you got to do something for 10,000 hours, or you go into the cave. You just sort of hear these things. Well, you got to isolate yourself. You got to leave your family. And that's what they used to do, right? It's like, no, you don't. You don't have to do that. And what are other ways of regulating your nervous system, or understanding the true nature of yourself or reality, and how is that correlated with any of the neuroscience that we're finding, right? So there's an embodied practice, and then there's a neuroscience, there's a scientific element to it. And at the end of the day, I don't, I'm not like, oh my goodness, the science said this, because believe me, I've done science, right? I know the number of errors in science. When you read the primary literature, you know, even things that are published in the primary literature, I went to Harvard Medical School. Right. The first lecture of the first day of medical school, we are essentially told that 50% of what we are going to learn in medical school is going to turn out to be wrong. That's what we're told, right? But this is what we think we know now, right? And so if you're told that 50% of what you're learning in medical school at that time from one of the best medical schools in the world is 50% of it is going to be wrong, right? That's where the constant investigation comes through. That's where the constant inquiry comes through. Okay, and then you go out. Was that and then you put into practice, and then you do your own research, and then you go into the lab and you do your research, and you see how difficult it actually is, and how long it takes, and how these studies take years to complete, and how much bias there is in it. And then you see that you try to replicate other studies, and it's very difficult to replicate studies. And then you ask, was that true or was that not true? Was there falsification of data? And now we see that there's some giants in the field in stem cells and other, from my field, biological sciences and stem cells, that fabricated data. So it's not that it's just sort of like science is holy and this is the only. No, absolutely not. There's frauds out there in science at some of the best universities, and then there's frauds out there in the in the spiritual realm as well, who just want to are power hungry and mongers, and want to abuse and all that stuff. So I basically bring it down to, I read the science and I do the practice, and then innately, right, authentically, what do I feel? And over time, am I fixed, like brick brain? No. Right. Even if I think that I'm doing a practice correctly, or I think I'm having been, there's always that inquiry is what am I noticing here? What is, and so even that, even something I've done, does this work? Does this not work? Does this help? Does this not help? How is this? What am I noticing in this moment? What am I noticing in this moment? And it's sort of like, and it's a path. It's sort of like, okay, I'm going over here to the right, and now I'm gonna kind of go over here to the left, and oh, that ended up being a dead end over there. It seemed like a really good territory, but it's not. So we're gonna backtrack, and then we're gonna kind of go down it. But that's the process. All right. So good stuff. Yeah, and if you are interested, we put a lot of these things up on YouTube. If you're interested in any of the cerebrospinal fluid, I put a lot of that stuff on YouTube as well. So if you just look me up on YouTube, we put a lot of these discussions up, and it's free. Free. So we've been investigating. So one of the things that we've been investigating before, quotes on the creative way, which I found very entertaining. Thank you very much. We've been investigating this sort of awareness and dropping or relaxing our attention, resting our attention, and using sound to recognize that there's the sound. So like, hand clapping or something like that. And then there's that you're hearing the sound, and then there's an element of being aware that there's a listening, there's a hearing of the sound. And so almost these sort of three levels of attention that we can pay attention to. And so, I'm always looking for sort of analogies of describing this or of investigating it, because sometimes on the mental level it can be a little heady, let's say. Frequent analogies that we have used are the ocean. The ocean is a really good analogy. And if you ever go in the ocean, if you ever go scuba diving or even snorkeling, if you feel comfortable doing so, kind of going underwater and looking up and get into the space. You don't need to go far down. If you're scuba diving, 10, 20, 30 feet down, where when you're at the top of the waves, you really notice the turbulence of the waves, and you're kind of going up and down with the waves and stuff like that. And then as you slowly go under 10 feet, 20 feet, you start to get lower and lower, and you don't feel the undulations of the waves as much. You get down. And if you're at 30 feet or 40 feet or 50 feet or 60 feet, you could actually sit at the bottom of the ocean. And you might be just sort of going a little bit to the left, a little bit to the right, a little bit to the left. But you can look up and you can see, and if you came down from a boat, you can see the boat, and the boat might be moving quite a bit. And you're just peacefully sitting on the sand at the bottom of the ocean. That's actually a really good felt sense of what that awareness, sort of the dropping of your attention is sort of like we could be in the waves. And let's not get it wrong, right? Like a lot of us have fun playing in the waves, right? Maybe we take a surfboard and we surf on the waves, or we jump over the waves, or we dive through the waves, right? But we know that we're playing in the waves. And then other times it's like, oh my goodness, these waves are too much. And, and we want to get out of it, right? And so if you think of sort of the moments of the mind, or the objects of the mind, thoughts, feelings, awareness, or thoughts, feelings, and emotions, how those might be the waves, and how sometimes it might be fun to play in those waves, but other times you kind of want to get out of there and be like, I want to drop down, right? But the wave, right? If we're looking at it from the perspective of the water molecule that's in the wave is not separate from the water molecules. It's not any different than the water molecules that are down at the bottom of the ocean. So in terms of the content or substance of that which is creating the waves, it's all the same. So that's also important to recognize, is that the thoughts and emotions and sensations it's the same substance. It's consciousness in flow. right? And it's just a matter of from what perspective we are kind of choosing to experience this from, right? And another one we've used is the sky. The sky is also a really good one, right? And one of my favorite things, and we've probably all experienced this, but we've all hopefully sat like when we were kids, or we can do it even today. Today's a beautiful day in LA if you're here. And you just lay on the ground and you look up and you see the clouds passing in the sky, and you ask yourself, right, where, like, the cloud would be like a thought that's passing in the sky, and the sky would be like awareness, for instance. Okay, so there is a thought in the sky, right? But the sky isn't influenced by the cloud. It's not like it's identified by the cloud or anything like that. We might, because we see it as sort of an object in the sky, but the sky's not really worried. The sky's not really concerned about the cloud in there. And weather is a really good example of this, because you might go out and there might be a storm and you're like, oh, you don't like storms and stuff like that, but yet the storm is going to pass, right? And so that's, again, sort of an analogy of a thought or a state of mind that you're in, that you feel like you're caught in, right? That you don't want to be in that. But knowing that states of mind can pass, and that it depends on our perspective in terms of where we are, what we are paying attention to, or where we're resting in that state of perspective in terms of our identification with that. Like, can we rest more in the sky than in the actual storm, right? And if you've ever flown in an airplane, this is like, when you're a kid, or even now, it's like really cool, right? It's like the pilot's like, hey, there's a storm coming up. We're going to try to get out of here before the storm comes in, right? And you're like, gee, this is going to be fun. And it's like noon, right? And you see the darkness kind of coming in, and you see the rain, and the winds are picking up. And if you're down on the ground, you're going to get wet. It's going to be blown, you're going to be blown away. And the captain says, all right, guys, we're taking off. And you're like, sweet, we're getting out of here. Thank God. And yet there's a bit of trepidation, right? Well, we're going to fly through the storm. But you may have experienced this where, for instance, you're going through the storm, guiding your children through it. You're taking off through the storm, and the airplane is going through. Right, you're feeling the storm, you're feeling the wind, the airplane's feeling the wind, and then you're going through the clouds, and even the substance of the clouds is actually affecting the plane. Right, there's more density in it. It's sort of right. You can actually see or hear the water hitting the windows, and then right, what happens? You go through the clouds, and you almost think like it's a completely different, it's like a completely different state, right? You get through the clouds and you're like, and then the sun is shining, right? You're like, wow, we're now above, right? You get through the cloud, you're above the storm. Well, what's above the storm at noon? Well, it's a bright, sunny day above the storm at noon, because the sun is, however many billion miles away or whatever, and it's still shining on the earth, but there were just these clouds that were covering it. And so what was our perspective? Well, our perspective from the earth was stormy, cloudy, black, dark, windy, cold, and then we got through the clouds and we get above it. And so that's just sort of shifting it in terms of looking at it. If those analogies help, use those in terms of asking yourself, what am I relating with? Right? Where is my perspective coming from this situation? Even when you're, not to say, but being in the middle of a surgery is like a great time to experiment those things, because it's sort of like, and so like, oh, I'm going to try to breathe and I'm going to look at myself, it's like when those times happen, is actually a really good time to experiment on that. And even ask yourself, from what perspective am I coming from here? What perspective am I identifying with clearly? Another one, which I have not talked about so frequently, but I have talked about, which I also think is kind of interesting as well, is the concept of space. right? So if I was to ask you, for instance, like to describe the room you're in, right? Describe the room you're in. You're probably going to look at your room and tell me the colors of your walls, things that are on your that are hung on the wall. But almost nobody would probably notice the space that the walls are creating, right? And so, in that essence, right, the space is like awareness, and the walls are like the thoughts, feelings, emotions that are appearing in the space to create this entity that we call a room, right? So in awareness, my thoughts, emotions, and sensations are appearing, which many of us identify with and call it me. All right. But from the perspective of the space, right? The space, my hands are in this space, right? The space could care less about the walls or what's hanging on the walls. Right now, if I took a bulldozer and got rid of the walls, would the space change? No, space wouldn't change, right? Space is here. My hand is in this space. If I got rid of all the walls, does the space that my hand in change? No, there's no change in this. The walls are gone, but the space is still there. I just took a wall and put it up in space and now called it a room. Okay. So that's also a really good kind of experiential of what am I relating to? Right? What am I relating to in this moment? Because what we usually do is we usually relate to the space that we're in based on the walls that actually create the enclosure that close off the space from the outside and the inside. But the space here is no difference if the walls were up or down. All right. So again, the walls or the doorways or the objects in my space, those are the thoughts and emotions and sensations. All right. Now I can choose, right, to relate to this space as simply space, right? Just like I can choose to relate to the hearing of a sound as the awareness of listening or listening. I'm hearing the sound or the sound itself, right? Or a thought, right? And so we usually construct ourselves and create a sense of ourself, who we think we are, based on our thoughts, emotions, and sensations, which would be what's on our walls, or would be, for instance, the waves on top of the ocean, or what is in the sky, the clouds, the storms, whatever it might be. And when there's a storm, we identify with the storm. And when the storm is gone, we identify with clear weather. When the waves are there tumultuous, we identify with the tumultuous waves, and that's who we think we are. And when it's calm, we identify with the calm. And just like our rooms, we're actually looking at the walls of the room and not connecting with the space that is created by the walls of the room. If the walls of the room disappeared, the space would still be the same. Regardless of what the pattern of the weather is, the sky is the same. All right. And so this is just like it's a shift of perspective that we can do with our attention, and very similar to kind of the sound, but it's sort of like, okay, and today what we're going to do is we're going to do it with the space around us and seeing if we can shift our perspective to recognize the space that we are in purely based on the perspective of space, as opposed to the space that we're in purely based on perspective of the walls that are around us. All right. And I know that might seem a little quirky. It can be a very interesting sort of shift in, like when you're sitting in your kitchen, like what was the space of your kitchen prior to your home being built? What was your space? Right? There's a space there. And now all of a sudden you put a wall around it and you call it your kitchen. But the space, like my hand in that space, would have still been in the same space had the walls been around it or not. Just like awareness is awareness, regardless of what thoughts, emotions, or sensations are appearing in awareness. That awareness is aware of those thoughts, sensations, and emotions, and does not need to identify with them. Okay. So let's try that practice. Okay, so let's find a comfortable posture. A posture you feel relaxed yet alert. Closing your eyes if you feel comfortable closing your eyes. If not, getting a soft downward gaze as if you're gazing off onto the horizon. And taking 2 or 3 deep breaths. And allowing yourself to be here now for this practice. And then breathing regularly. At whatever pace or rhythm works best for you. And bringing your attention to your anchor or your resource. A place that you can direct your attention to that you feel safer. And as your mind wanders or is pulled away, as your attention is pulled away by something that comes in, tries to distract you, pull you away from your anchor or resource, simply recognizing that and coming back to your anchor or resource without judgment, without good or bad, without right or wrong. And that is mindfulness. Bringing your attention to the present moment on purpose, without judgment. Now, if you can, in your mind's eye, imagine the room or the space that you are in. If you need to open your eyes, you can open your eyes, and purely as if you are observing or witnessing with your eyes, simply describing the space that you're in. How are you defining it or expressing what the space you're in? And just noticing where you're going. How you're describing where you're sitting or lying. And now just see if you can be in the space. Be where you are. From the perspective of the space that you are occupying, as opposed to anything that is surrounding you. As if all the walls disappeared. As if you're outside, any trees or hills were gone. Simply being in the space that you are occupying. Does that space depend on anything around it? To be the space that you are occupying. And now noticing your surroundings again. Noticing any walls or fences, any ceilings. And asking yourself, is this space dependent on these walls or ceilings or fences? Or is this space purely space? And seeing if you can rest in the space purely as space, without any constraints from any walls, ceilings, buildings, fences. Just allowing yourself to rest in that space. Can you orient your perspective to the space as opposed to all the objects that are around you? And just noticing where your attention is now. Just noticing what a slight shift in orientation may cause for you. That the walls and the ceilings and the fences are like our thoughts, emotions, or sensations. That we often identify with those. However, resting in the space that does not change. It's just like resting in awareness. Everything is created in the space, just like everything is created in awareness. But the space, just like awareness, is not defined by it or identifies with it. It's our choice what perspective we take. And as we bring this meditation to a close, just seeing if this meditation worked for you, if there's a shift in perspective as you go throughout your day. Maybe noticing the space that you're occupying more than the objects around you. Just like we can be aware of awareness rather than identifying with our thoughts, emotions, and behaviors. And with that, taking 2 or 3 deep breaths, opening your eyes if your eyes were closed, stretching or moving if you need to stretch, and just reflecting on your practice today.